Okay, so we are going to get started, and I apologize for this delay, and we don't have... Iracema, can you turn the sound down for me, please? Thank you. And we don't have... Marcelo is still working on finalizing to your left. Iracema, to your left.
The radio na cadeira.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the 3 people who need a translation for Portuguese to please watch outside for me for a minute, okay? I'm confident that they're going to be able to finalize so that everybody can be here with the headsets. But I don't want you to miss anything, okay? So, and if you want, we have the TV there, it's going to be showing there, and I have a person over there that's going to be doing the translation, just for now, okay? All right? So, to open our seminar today, we have some American friends who have joined us, and who are not familiar necessarily with the concept of Spiritism. So before we delve into talking about these complex ideas that we will discuss today, I would like to play a short video introducing Spiritism to the ones who are not familiar with it. Can you get myself from me, please? I need to get the sound coming out of the... Maybe there was a wire.
Imagine a science that doesn't distance itself from faith and ethics, a religion that counts on the enlightenment of science.
A body of knowledge that explains who we are, where we come from, and what we are doing here.
Oh yes, most importantly, what is our destiny?
A way of interpreting nature, unveiling before us its mystery and understanding of the law of progress which are all under. A science that understand the invisible world and faith with reason. A science that connects us to God and which allows for an unshakable faith based on reason. Is Spiritism all of this?
Yes, and much more.
Because it stands side by side with science and progress, meaning it evolves naturally, much like humanity does. The Spiritist principles are
The existence of God, supreme intelligence and first cause of all things, infinitely just and good.
Immortality of the soul. We are immortal spirits, spiritual beings having a physical experience.
We had a beginning, we were created by God, but we reincarnate. And upon discarnation, that is, death of the physical body, our spirit lives on, ready for new experiences. Which brings us to the plurality of existence.
Reincarnation.
We have had many existences where our sole purpose and objective is spiritual progress and spiritual growth, enlightenment. Here's where we should pay close attention to the principle that guide our values, moral values, that is.
We learn that we are heirs of ourselves,
Authors of our own destinies, based on our actions in this lifetime and the future ones. Because, after all, we are governed by the great law of cause and effect. Plurality of inhabited worlds.
Earth is our home for the time being.
But there are many other inhabitable places in the universe, which we will one day learn about. Before we do, however, we must first learn about the basis for fraternity and harmony in the here and now, communicability with the spirits. Life continues after physical death, and we don't lose touch with those who are on the other side. No, those who parted before us maintain the spiritual ties of love and fraternity, which are eternal and everlasting. We can learn from other spirits, be guided or misguided, help or even be helped by them.
Spiritism comes to us facilitating the natural need to have answers to the fundamental questions in life.
And when we use the plug-in adding the concept of reincarnation based on the natural law of cause and effect, everything that comes from the Creator is seen as truly just and good, and our vision about life broadens infinitely.
Know thyself, said a sage in antiquity.
And learning about spiritual and natural laws facilitates the need to know oneself. It's time to be conscious and aware.
All right, I ask you to join us. Oops. Hello? Hi? I don't know. I'll speak loud. I ask you to join me in an initial prayer. Dear Father, thank you so very much for the opportunity that we have to be here today. We gather today in your name with the purpose of studying, of seeking clarity, of understanding who we are in essence, of understanding the reasons why we are here, the purpose of life. And we approach this day with a very humble stance of one who knows that needs guidance and support. So we ask you to please be with us. Inspire in particular every single speaker so that they can reflect not only their individual thoughts, but above else, what science brings us today, and most importantly, the principles that we learn in Spiritism that speaks about our immortality. Thank you so very much for the blessing of this day. Thank you so very much for the presence of our mentors and benefactors, and thank you so very much to every single person who is joining us this morning. Whether they're here, whether they're listening to us, or whether they are simply praying that this day can be a day of light, of enlightenment, and of nourishment to our souls. So with that, we ask your permission to get started with our seminar today. Thank you very much, and so be it. All right, so again, I'm sorry for the delay, and we will get going with our two initial lectures. The first one by Lima, 45 minutes, and then Sheri Ashcraft, and then we'll have our morning break. Luis, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Sexuality and responsibility, very important. Responsibility ties into moral. So we are going to briefly talk about this. Try now. You hear me now? Oh, that's better. I can hear myself now. Okay, so it's a broad subject. So if we were to compile information to speak about it, we can kind of go to Google and see what we can find about Spiritism and responsibility. So I'm just going to type sexuality and responsibility under the light of Spiritism. And we get some interesting things here, I guess, right? Spiritism 201, sex and sexuality, that sounds interesting. What does it say there? Sex and sexuality are different things. Spiritism takes us back to the root of the subject so we can understand their differences. That sounds promising. So we're going to take that one. Let's see what they say on their site here. Spiritism 201, sexuality. Okay, sex and sexuality are not the same thing. Okay, there are several ways to define this thing. I like this particular definition on this book. It's published in one of the state federations in Brazil. And it's not a channeled book. It's just written by an incarnate author. But she says something very interesting. She defines this way. Sexuality is a creative force, born in the depths of the inner being. Every experience lived by a spiritual principle, us, before it's awakened to rationality, meaning going through all the kingdoms before hominal kingdom, is recorded in its intimacy within the pure spiritual automation. So there's going to be a point where this becomes automated. So what we bring today as sexuality is an automation of a huge history of our spiritual history. Okay. I think that the light is off. Right?
It's flashing a red light over here.
Yeah, okay, well.
Have you ever seen a projector deincarnating?
That's one of them. Okay.
That's probably, well, let me get the other projector.
Okay. Okay, there's a lot of graphics and images in this presentation, so we're not going to be able to see. Let's see how far we can go. It's a very graphic presentation. Anyway, so we were talking about sexuality, which ties into the spirit level. Sex ties into the physical level. Sex, this same author says, is the biological expression of sexuality. So it's, you bring it from the spiritual realm and you put it into the physical realm. It's shaped in such a way that causes male and female to be different, both in animals and vegetables, giving each one a specific role in procreation. So what he's saying is, sex has to do with the physical body, male body, female body. Sexuality has to do with the spirit, the mind. You're at a higher level. Okay, so let's study a little bit of evolution of sexuality. It all begins when we have the first living beings. bacteria. So bacteria, if you go to books like Evolution in Two Worlds, Andrei describes in pretty much details what happens from the first living beings, first bacteria, until us, until we get to current days. We're not going to do all of that, but we're going to just briefly mention that. So the first bacteria, the first living beings, are unicells. They are one-cell beings. These cells are called prokaryotes. That means these cells do not have a nucleus. As we know, cells, human cells have a nucleus where the DNA is, our genetic is, and everything else is called cytoplasm. These cells do not have a nucleus. Therefore, there is no DNA. Therefore, all the individuals are the same. There's no distinction. Distinction is made by DNA. I'm different from you because we have different DNAs. These cells don't have that ability. So every living being in this level is the same. They all react the same way. There's no difference. These initial bacteria, they go over time. They go to the next level, which is called Leptotrix. Leptotrix is also still a bacteria, still a one-cell being, but they, in order to survive, they feel the need to stay together. So they start approaching each other. They like touch each other, if you will, and they place themselves against the rocks. Remember, life is on the seas now. There's no life on Earth yet. It hasn't moved to land yet. So water just moves these cells around, these bacteria around. So what they do is they bind themselves. They form a group and they go against the rock so they can survive without being thrown. That's the very first indication of communion. Okay, that one day we're going to get to something like this. And then we go into the next level, which is the green algae, which is also an evolution from these bacteria. The cells are larger, they're getting a little bit more complex. And all of this, I'm telling you, all these cells, because whatever is in one level gets to the next level as the spiritual principle goes through its evolutionary path. It accumulates this. That's what it says. It's accumulate all of this in its spirit. And then we get into the next thing, which is when the spiritual world brings us what they call the colloids. Colloids, it has to do with binding things, like a gum, where these cells are now no longer individual. You can collate cells. You can bind cells, because one day the perispirit is going to be out there, and the perispirit is a huge collection of cells, and the body is the same. So at one point, these cells started to bind together. That is the point where the colloids are. From the colloids, we go into special proteins inside the cells. They will be called later chromosomes. That's what we today call chromosomes. They are special proteins in the cell with no function. When this starts, at the time there is no function. It's just a chain of proteins. The next level is the genes. So now these cells have these chromosomes, these proteins, and these proteins are long, if you will. You can imagine it's a very long tape of organic matter, and this tape is, quotes, divided into small pieces. Each piece is a gene. So there's a piece that controls the color of my hair. There's another piece that controls the color of my skin, my eyes, and so on and so on. So each one of these are genes. This is where differentiation starts. Differentiation starts right here, because now one individual would be different from the other, because we now have a special particular code, that's a genetic code, DNA, for each one of these. So DNA and differentiation starts in the vegetable kingdom, in the planted kingdom. From there, we go into from the most simple vegetables to the most complex and more complicated ones. Cells are getting more complex. The functionality of the whole organism is more complex now. And then we go to what we call the superior limit of this kingdom, which are the carnivore plants, where they will be almost animals, but still plants. So they're like, you don't know if they are here or here. They're in the boundary. They define the lower end of the animal kingdom. Okay. Then we go into the animal kingdom, where we have the most simple animals. Same thing, you have very simple cells in animal kingdom. They get more complicated, more complex, and then we get to the big animals. One of these animals, or some of these animals, are like the dinosaurs and T-Rexes and all of those. They're very huge, very complex animals. We cannot even live with them on the same land, because one dinosaur gets in here, they open their mouth, we all go in. It wouldn't make sense. That's what Spirit Andrei Luiz calls monstrous forms. So these monstrous forms have to be worked on by the spiritual mentors until they get a body adjusted to a size that's more livable with different beings, these being us. Okay? I think it's going to work. All right, let's see.
Getting close.
Getting closer. We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah, I see the light.
Yes.
All right.
Yay, Marcelo.
Okay. Yeah, no, just get up and come back. Okay, anyway, let me continue. Then we go from the animals, we go into the humans, the hominal world, and that's us. And one thing that we bring very strongly from the animal kingdom is instinct. Again, this is all being automated. Every single experience throughout all these million of years is being recorded in our perispirit. So when we get to, thank you, when we get to the hominal world, not only the instinct is very pronounced, as we know, it comes from the animal kingdom, but certain other things start to take form. One of these is, as you see here, the sexual hormones. Hormones, what are hormones? Hormones are messages that circulate through the bloodstream with the intention to send a message to all the cells. It's a broadcasting. So some organ in the body sends that message out. Depends on the organ, depends on what it is. There are several hormones in the body, but some organ sends this message, and the message is do this or do that. The cells who have to respond to that message will respond properly. And then the sexual hormones start in a hominal world. That's us. And the problem starts here, because we need to control this. That's where responsibility comes in place. You see, it's not that there is no sex between the animals, but it's different than ours. They have almost like a time frame for that. And they don't do it for a very long time. Then it's time to do it again. Then it's time not to do it. Then it's time to do it. It's different than us. We don't have this fragmented, per se, necessity of sex. We have it very continuously. And that continuity is where the problem is, because there's got to be a limit. There's a limit, and the limit comes with responsibility. And then we get into the more modern world, where all these psychic experiences takes us to levels that are not moral. We go out of moral standards, we do things that we shouldn't be doing, we don't see the connection between love and sex in a lot of places or in a lot of situations. So this psychic experience needs to address that second line in there. Sex needs to be, for us, controlled and a nourishment. It has to be a spiritual nourishment, not a physical factor, not something physical. All right, so we go through all of this, and this is all in our perispirit now. And now we're going to have to deal with responsibility. Then Allan Kardec tells us, as we know already, we are spirit and body, and there's something in between. If you look at the spirit level, the polarity of being later on incarnating as a female body or a male body is there. You see, the body is physical. At the spirit level, there is no body. So the ability to go this way or go that way is just there. It's just a potential energy. So the knowledge is for both models. And then Allan Kardec asks that. He goes to the spirit and he says, well, what makes the spirit choose for the incoming incarnation a male body or a female body? And the answer is very simple. It says, well, it matters little to a spirit, depends on the trials he must go. Which is okay, but then Allan Kardec himself, not the spirit, Allan Kardec himself makes a comment, a very interesting comment, This is what it says, that the spirit can incarnate as either men or women, since they must progress in every way, because we're going to be angelical one day, so we need to run the progress line all the way up to the end, right? So, like each social position offers them special trials, duties, and new opportunities to acquire experience, and here's the key. The one who always incarnates as a man would only know what men know. So, if we're going to be angelical, I have to go through every single possible experience in the male body, including being a father, for example. But I also have to know and go through every single possible experience in the female body, being a mother, for example, biologically. So there will be times where I come in a male body, there will be times where I come into a female body. The potentiality, which is at the spirit level, is there. Then Allan Kardec tells us that there's a connection between the spirit and the body. He calls that perispirit. We're not going to go too much into that because we already know that. But this perispirit follows the mind. So it follows the spirit. It doesn't follow the body. It follows the mind. Okay? And again, that is where all the experiences for all this huge process that I told you, they are recorded. Everything is in the perispirit. And we're going to use that experience as needed for this life or next life and so on and so on. So depends on the life, depends on the purpose of each life. But the experiences are all archived in there. And then we go to the physical level where we have that's the first definition right there about sex instead of sexuality, where we have the genitals, and these are biological expressions of the reproductive force center. Sex is neutral. People will give it a tone. Sex is just sex. Now, how I handle that, how I do that, that's going to define my morals, my responsibility. Responsibility is the key here. Okay? All right. Then we go. Now we know that this perispirit becomes something important. Understanding the perispirit is going to make us understand this connection between how the spirit applies its sexuality to the physical world. And this Gustave Gillet, he's a French physician. If you see his lifetime, 1868, that's when Allan Kardec was about to discarnate. That's when the last book of the Spiritism codification came out, the Genesis. So he was very young when he was about 14, 15, when he started to study the Spirits book, and he was amazed. And he at one point he says, "Well, I'm reading this book as I'm reading a romance. That's not what I should do." He was in the middle of the book, and he said, "I'm going to start all over again from scratch. This is not a romance. This is a study book, and I have to do this more seriously." As he goes along, he finds out that the secret to understanding all of that, all those questions and answers and all of it, is in the perispirit. So he decides to dive deeply into studying the perispirit. But if you look into this is 1900s or so. There's not a whole lot. It's difficult to get information. There's no technology to investigate anything. And he takes the job. He says, "I'm going to do it." And he does. And he's probably the first person who go really, really deep and bring a lot of information, a lot of ideas about the perispirit. And he writes a book. It's called The Perispirit. In this book, there are two phrases that are very interesting. First, look at how he goes. The perispirit is the bonding element between soul and the body. That's no news for us. Okay? Also, the necessary condition for the relations between the moral and the physical. See, he doesn't go with the standard spirit and body. It's how I apply moral into the physical world. And he continues, and this is, personally, I think is the best, the longest and the shortest, at the same time, if it's possible, definition of perispirit. It's the most defining thing about the perispirit, with the less words possible that I ever see myself, that I ever seen myself. The perispirit is composed by the quintessence of the combined elements of past incarnation. Just like that. Meaning everything is in there. Everything is in this perispirit. It's going to be more subtle or more matter-like depending on the evolution of the spirit. Also, Dr. Marlene Nob. Okay. Go ahead. to?
No.
Okay. She addresses that. She addresses that in this book. We could translate this as like our life in the afterlife. And this is something interesting she says. Everything the being has stored from past experiences, as we just saw, incarnation after incarnation, for centuries and centuries, either as a vegetable or an inferior animal, becomes its asset. So everything is there. It's an asset. When it reaches reason, when it becomes human, receiving this way, in its hominal phase, a world of impulses coming from the sexual energy center that must be educated and adjusted according to the divine laws. So you see, everything is in there, but we start getting these hormones, we generate these impulses, and that's where we're going to have to start controlling this thing. And then the perispirit, by being this form of transmitting the information on the mind to the body, how is that transmitted to the body? How is that felt by the body? How this psychic information, per se, that's at the spirit level, comes into the physical world. It's through one of the organs in our bodies called the pineal gland. This is a huge study, pineal gland. We can spend hours here talking about it. So we're just going to mention what is needed for today's talk. It has three functions in the body. One of them is chronobiological, time, biological biology, in which it's responsible for awakening sexuality. Okay. A second function is endocrine, which is as a gland. It generates hormones, it controls a lot of things in the body. That's not what we're looking today, but it also is sensorial, where that's how I perceive the psychic world. That's how I grab this information out there. That's how I feel the influences of spirits surrounding us. This could be good or bad. This is just a capture device, if you will. Now, I can capture good things or bad things depending on my standards, my morals, etc. But this is how the information gets into the body. So we know about perispirit, we know about the pineal gland. All right, what else do we have here? Oh, we have Spiritism, analysis of the sexual function. That sounds promising too. Let's look at this. Let's see what happens here. Okay, let's look at the sexual function, the sexual interaction. There are three types of sexual interaction defined by Andrei Luiz. One is what he calls the genital adventure. And this is something, as you see here, very personal, with no interest whatsoever on the partner, no interest in anything else than self-satisfaction. It's driven towards pure self-satisfaction. There's no engagement, no worries about what the partner is, how they feel. It's just, I'm interested in myself. It's pure self-satisfaction. So it's called genital adventure. There's another level, Andrei Luiz says, which he calls the animal magnetism. That would be still, there's no love in there, it's still a disinterested partnership, but at least it's a partnership. You know, it's something like this. Oh, I want to do this. Do you want to do it? Yeah, let's do it. And then later on, I go this way. My partner goes this way, and that's it. It's just disinteresting. There's no bond. There's no attachment. It's very common in our society today, especially among the young people. It's becoming almost epidemic in our society, in the Western civilization at least. And there's a third type of experience, which Andrei Luiz calls the sexual communion. So just the word communion changes everything, because now there's some communion comes from common. There's a common interest. I'm interested in this. My partner is interested in this. That's it. Okay, this is what it says. There's influx of love. So there is something that is out of the physical plane, totally out of the physical plane. So you're moved from here over here to begin with. Real exchange of psychic energies. So when this occurs, when this takes place, the interaction is not between bodies anymore. It's psychic. You're at the psychic level. It's an interaction between perispirits now. As you see here, replenishment of perispirits. The satisfaction does not come at the physical level. It comes at the perispiritual level, the mind level. And Andrei Luiz calls this a union of quality. That's an interesting thing. If you look at the book itself, on the text, when he gets to this, the words unity of quality are in bold and italic in the book. That might mean something, right? So that's why I put it in bold and italic here, so you can see it's because the book is this way. So this union of quality is what we should really be doing, not the other two types, not the animal magnetism, not the genital adventure, because that's what's going to give me pleasure. And this is where things get confused. How come? Because supposedly I can have pleasure with genital adventure, and I can have pleasure with animal magnetism. Then I'm going to ask you to define pleasure, because it could be something that we're not really talking about the same thing. So in a research in Holland many years ago, they came out with some very interesting data, and I'm going to show it to you. The first thing is, we know from science, from studies, that the sexual interaction, the sexual function has 4 levels. Okay, the first level is the excitement, where the two partners just get excited. It's the very beginning. That translates into the masculine body as erection, and it translates into the feminine body as lubrication. Then there's a second level, which is called a plateau. Right? Okay, so you're already a little bit more excited, and that's when the contact between organs starts, between partners. Contact between the partners starts. Then there's a synchronism of energy, because if there's no synchronism here, you won't go any further. Okay? Third level, the orgasm. It takes place at the genitals. You see, orgasm is physical. We're still at the physical level here. If you ask a doctor, can you define orgasm? He's going to say something like this. Well, it's a pure and simple. It's a muscular response to a stimulus. Because if you look at the physical body only, that's what it is. There's a stimulus, and the muscles respond to that stimulus. And then the last level, the top level, is the actual pleasure. And that does not take place in the body anywhere. It takes place in the brain, so you're still at the physical level. Now, look at this last piece of information here, which might sound a little strange to you. 100% stimulation of Papez circuit. What is that? Because that's the question, right? It's beautiful, nice, very scientific, but yeah, what is it? Okay, what is this Papez circuit? Papez is the name of the scientist who discovered this in the 1960s. It's a path in the brain where things occur. Okay, when things occur in the brain, anything in the brain, there's a succession of things. This happens and that triggers this, it triggers this, it triggers this, it triggers this. So it can form a path of this thing happening. That's what this Papez circuit is. Papez was studying pleasure, and he found out which areas of the brain and the path. It happens first here, then here, then here, then here, then here. And if you look at here, it's formed by different structures, and there's all on the second bullet here, you see all these structures that are part of it. It doesn't matter to us, it's just curiosity, but you see the number of places in the brain that get involved just for us to feel this pleasure. Now, things that we know about this. First, 90% of the Papez circuit is associated with sexual pleasure. So there is another 8% in which we have pleasure, but it's not sex. For example, let's say that I absolutely love to listen to classic music on the beach. So I take my iPod and I go to the beach and I listen to classical music. When I'm out of it, when I get out, I'm in pleasure. That's that kind of pleasure. So there are several pleasures that don't have anything to do with sex, but sex responds for 92%. It's very strong. Pleasure is only achieved when the Papez circuit receives 100% stimulus. Think of a highway, 6 lanes, okay? And then you have more cars and more cars and more cars. When you have it full, it becomes a parking lot. That's 100% of activity on that highway. That's what this is. If the brain does not feel that 100% of the Papez circuit is filled, there is no pleasure. Okay? And look at the last thing here. At 100%, meaning when we reach it, go ahead. Thank you. When we reach that 100%, then the Pompey circuit stops receiving stimulus, and now it's going to send stimulus out. Look at the mechanism. What is it sending out? It's sending out things like this. We can perceive this at times. After pleasure, okay, we see better. The eyes are sparkling more. The skin is different. I'm talking about after a few hours, maybe the first 2 or 3 hours, we listen to things that we didn't before. If you listen to a music, after that you can capture little instruments and sounds that you never captured before. And these are all scientific experiences. Because the Pompey circuit is telling you your vision is better now, your auditive circuit is better now, and so on and so on. So that's a very interesting mechanism. So he receives all this information, he reaches 100%, and he distributes information back. And then the research goes like this. Well, in order for me to reach 100% of pleasure, that's an easy thing, because the brain is a physical thing. We know, as science, we know almost everything, at least that's what it seems like about the brain. So if I know the Pompey circuit, if I know the areas of the brain that take part in the pleasure, all I have to do is do reverse engineering and see which nerve terminations or endings go to these areas. So let's say, for example, this is one point where the Pompey circuit, which is part of the Pompey circuit. If I go find out which nerve in that is that, and the nerve is, let's say, my knee. So touching my knee will help me give you pleasure. That's the idea behind it. Reverse engineering to see where these nerve endings are. All of them that take place in the Pompey circuit. So out of this 100% of the nerves, they find out that only 50 are actually nerves. They're physical. The other 50 are not. The other 50 that helps give us pleasures have to do with emotions. They are not physical parts of the body. That complicates already, because in order to reach 100% and have pleasure, emotion is at least half of the factor. If you're not in good terms with the partner, if things are not right, if things are not in place properly at the emotional level, that's not going to reach 100%. Supposing that everything is in place on the emotional level, out of the 50 physical, they found out more. It's not the first from male body and female body. On a male body, everything is physical. All these terminations are actual parts in the body. But for the women, 50% are related to the stimulus during the sexual act, but the other 50 have to do with reproduction. So it's very common, for example, for a woman in an hetero relation not being able to reach the orgasm because she's afraid of getting pregnant, for example. Because at least that 50% out of the 50 out of the 100 are not being part of it. So you can't reach 100% of the Pompey circuit. So there's a lot of factors that take part in this thing. And the most interesting thing is this. They decided to see, to measure the beats per minute in the heart as the sexual function takes place. So for example, we're here right now talking and everybody's sitting and I'm here. Our average heartbeat rate is about 80 beats per minute. That's the average. That's us right now. When we engage into a sexual act of any type, the first part, the excitement, will take us to about 150 beats per minute, almost double. The next phase, those phases we saw before, the next phase, the plateau, will take me to about 180. The next phase, which is the orgasm, will take me to 240. And then after the orgasm, this is going to take back to where it was. That's the natural course of things. So it would be something like this. Well, but it's a lot more than this. This sounds reasonable and so, but there's a lot more behind it. Look at this. If there is pleasure, meaning there was 100% of the Pompey circuit, the curve that decreases and puts the body back to its normal function is fast. This happens relatively fast. If not, if this happens under genital adventure, under animal magnetism, the body takes a very long time, the heartbeat takes a very long time to go back to its standard 80 in this case. And this could be days, this could be 2 days, it could be 3 days. So at the top, we saw that the Spate circuit stops receiving stimulus and starts sending stimulus. That will still happen, but the curve, if there's no pleasure, the curve under no pleasure will take time. The body will not recompose itself for 2 days, 3 days. And then they said, well, that's the heartbeat. Let's take other measurements. So they did for metabolic rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure. They're all the same. Doesn't matter what you're measuring. They are all the same. It always takes that long when there is no actual pleasure, when the relationship or the sexual act does not involve pleasure. That's very interesting. But we can take some conclusions now. Let's say, for example, we take this first curve here, which is a no pleasure style. Okay, no pleasure. That means it's going to take a long time for the body to come back to its normal. So the body, as you can see here, let me see if I can point to you. You see, the body's trying to come back to normal here. So let's say there was a sexual interaction, let's say last night, okay, with no pleasure. So the body's going to start coming back to normal. Now tonight, less than 24 hours, I'm going to do the same thing. It could be another partner. It could just go somewhere else and do the same thing. What happens? My body's not back at 80. Yeah, my heartbeat's not back at 80, it's higher. So when I do this next night, now I'm here. On the third night, I start from here now, and I go all the way up. There's going to be a point, let's say these are 3 nights. There's going to be a point where the body is begging for rest. And I'm going to say, okay, I'll give it a shot, 2 days, nothing. And then I do this again. And this becomes a cycle. It becomes simply a cycle. 3 days doing this, 1 day rest, maybe 2 days rest, and it goes like that. Well, there are consequences. When you are 20, when you are in your younger days, that might sound fun. But the problem is you're pumping the body with energy that's not good. And the body's going to feel this after 45, after 50. And there are consequences. The 4 major consequences are this. Number 1, 30% more chance of acute myocardial heart attack. Number 2, 33% more chance of stroke. Number 3, 12 to 30% more chance of multiple organ failure. And last, 72% more production of free radicals equals 72% more production of aging cells. And that's major. The body's going to feel this, not now, not in the next week, but 20 years after that, 30 years after that. And then we don't know why certain things happen. And it could be because of this. And then we go take the spiritual view and say, well, so you're talking about sex without pleasure, sex without love. So it's not really good. Yeah, it's not really good. It's not really good. It doesn't give you pleasure and it's bad for your health. So those little curves like that, it might sound fun when you're 20, 25. But,
Yeah.
and that's something we need to teach our kids. That's part of our responsibility towards them. See, there's responsibility, me and myself, that's personal, but there's collective. Now that we know this thing, we're going to pass this along. That's part of our goal in life. All right, so we look at this sexual function. Oh, there's more. Spiritism unlocks the key to sexuality and responsibility. Oh, I like that. Let's see what happens here. Okay. Look at this curve. Okay, so we already know what this means. It means when you're 20, you can do this. When you're 50, all those things can happen to you. And then there's a book. This is a very interesting book. It's from an incarnate author. It was published in Brazil. And this is the book. It's about sex and evolution. But there's one phrase in this book that captures the attention because of the way he phrased it, which is the truth. But just the words, the way he puts in words, makes it very interesting. Among all vices of human creatures, which we have a lot, but among all, the one that causes the most profound and vast imbalance to the organization of the spiritual body is sexual addiction. So what he's saying is, for the perispirit, this is worse than alcohol. This is worse than drugs. It's complicated. So hopefully we can pass this along to our kids, to the next generation. And here's something else. Here's another problem. When we go to study the connection between the perispirit and the physical body, there's something in between which we call vital fluid or double etheric. If we expand this thing, okay, keeping the same colors, what is this? Perispirit is where all my experiences are. We already saw that. The physical body is a repository of senses. If I want, one day I put my hand on something hot, I don't have to repeat that to know that I'm going to get burned, because it becomes a repository. In the middle, there's the element of attachment, which is called vital fluid or ectoplasm. So between the repository of sentiments and repository of sensations, there's a repository of vitality. The vital fluid is what gives me vitality. Only incarnates have that. Now, think about this. Let's say that I came here with a vital fluid enough for, let's just say, 80 years. And I behave like that when I'm 20, 15, 20. At 40, I discarnate. And it's sort of like an accident, because it wasn't the vital fluid degrading, nothing like this. So it could be seen as an accident. What happens? What happens when this takes place? Now I'm discarnate. You see, I'm still the same. I still need the same pleasure. I still need to keep doing the same thing that I was doing until the night before when I died. I still need the pleasure. I still need that vitality to give me pleasure. But I can't have vitality because I don't have that anymore. So what do? I have to borrow vitality from somebody. Somebody that's living, incarnate. Where do I go to seek people like that, people like me? I need to seek people like me who will give me the same pleasure that I had before. Where do I find these people? The places where this is done in that way. The same way the guy who drinks a lot, when he's discarnated like that, he goes after places and people who were doing the same thing, drinking heavily and so. It's the same concept. So in places where sex is practiced without responsibility, without any morals whatsoever, this is where we're going to find these people. They are looking for pleasure. They are looking to borrow vitality. And here's another phrase on that same book we showed in the beginning. Relationship in which the goal is nothing more than the animal activity. Animal activity, no love, nothing like this. They dissipate energies, lead to addiction, do not bring intimate satisfaction of plenitude, enslave the person in a never-ending cycle of repeated experiences. That's why these people go, these spirits, these discarnate spirits, they go to those places to seek for the pleasure they had before. And they become then obsession. Become obsessor. Because they want that. They're clinging to somebody who is willing to do the same thing or who is doing the same thing. No, not knowingly sometimes, but that's what happens. Andrei Luiz in The Missionaries of the Light. The sexual union, so now it's a union of quality, okay? Entails a sublime exchange of pure spiritual energies, symbolizing divine nourishment for the mind and the heart, and create power not only for the children of the flesh, but also for generous deeds and achievements of the soul for eternal life. Translating, sublime sexual unit gives you physical pleasure and spiritual pleasure as well, because it gives you spiritual interaction. You're really at the higher level. Still Andrei Luiz, we come to comprehend that sex resides in the mind. Sex is a thing of the physical plan, but it resides in the mind because it comes from it, how we're going to use it. And as a consequence of the physical body, through a creative sanctuary of our love for life, and as such, no one will mock it, disharmonizing its forces without first mocking and demoralizing himself or herself. So it's about moral. It's about how responsibility and moral go together in this thing here. How we practice this, how we do this. Okay? Oh, then we go back, there's more. There's one final view. What is that? Spiritism and Sexuality. Google is good, right? Spiritism and Sexuality, the final overview. Spiritism brings sexuality to a whole different level of comprehension. Yeah, it does, absolutely. From its initial codification by Allan Kardec to more elaborated modern Spiritist literature, the subject is approached in many, well, now I want to know what it is. Many what? Let's see what this guy is saying. Okay, this is Emmanuel. Sex is spirit and life that promotes happiness and harmony in the universe. In the universe. Therefore, it claims responsibility and discernment, where and when expressed by itself. For that reason, our brothers and sisters need to and must know what to do with their sexual energies. So learn how to deal with that. By having in mind with whom and for what they make use of such resources. So whom means the partner. It has to be union of quality. And for what? It's not just because I want pleasure for myself. Yeah. Understanding that all commitments in regard to their sexual behavior are equally subject to the law of cause and effect, just like everything else. And by means of this very principle, the law of cause and effect, everything we give to others within the affection realm will come back to us. So if I treat partners as things and objects, at one point, you might not be in this life, but at one point I'm going to have to deal with that. I'm going to have to be accountable for that. So responsibility. Now, 3 things here so we can understand responsibility. First, respect for my own body. Otherwise, I'm going to go into the curve. Respect for my own body. Right? Number 2, respect for the potential partner. You see, sex can be seen as potential energy that you accumulate, and at times you use it, but you have to use it right. You have to use it the right way. You have to make good use of it, as Emmanuel just said. Respect for other people's choices and orientations. And that's something our society is having a lot of disturbance and problems accepting. But we as Spiritists, we need to understand these are choices and they have to be respected. It's respect. Number 2, diseases. When I go out there doing all these things that we discuss, all the curves and everything else, I have to pay attention to this because I might be an object or the means of transmitting diseases from one person to another. Because I had an interaction with this partner and I have with that partner, but when I had interaction with this one, I got some sort of disease or whatever it is, and that person is going to get it from me. So that's part of our responsibility, not transmitting or retransmitting diseases. And number 3, abuses. Raping. Raping is genital adventure. That's what it is. Number 2, online pornography. It's the same thing. There's not even a partner, not necessarily. So are we on online pornography? Are we making good use of our sexual energy? No, we're not. We're going to be accountable for it. And number 3, pedophilia. And other things, the list can go very long, list of abuses, but those are some of them. And we are having a hard time discussing these things in our society because our society does not have the level of understanding and education that we here can have. It's kind of easy for us to understand some of these things, but you go out there, it's very complicated. Depends on the belief system, depends on cultural levels. There's a lot of parameters that make it difficult for other people to understand. So to wrap up, sexuality is up here. It's at the spirit level. Okay? And then it translates into sex, into our physical body. But there's one more thing, which is this. I have to do that with another tone of responsibility, because when I do this, I might be responsible for bringing another life. And when that happens, I'm generating an opportunity for incarnation. So that puts my responsibility at an even higher level. Okay, so those 3 things that I just said, respect, and especially the abuse, respect and abuse, they have to be worked on our society. Again, it's relatively easy for us here, but not out there. And it is part of our collective responsibility to pass this information along to other people, not just for ourselves. We know this. We can go to other people. We can go to friends, especially our family. We can go to our kids and try to make them understand all of this. Thank you very much. You all have a good day.
Thank you very much, Luis. Hi, Freddy. We are going to our second lecture right now. We're going to change gears a little bit, and now we're going to talk about gender. And to speak about gender, I would like to invite Dr. Sheri Ashcraft, who has done some studies in this area, and just happens to be my wife.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's interesting. I think today we'll see some overlapping ideas and maybe some ideas that come into some tension in some kind of way. And that's always good because we can talk and discuss everything and flesh out the complexity of being human. And the purpose of my talk on gender, which is a massive, anybody who knows me a little bit knows I can be a little obsessive. So I may miss certain things, I may, condense things, but hopefully, again, we'll be able to talk further about it, kind of starting a conversation. The purpose of my talk is to really kind of engage everyone in reflecting on gender and your own gender story, your own history. As long as you can remember the experience of living in your body and however you identify, as what gender you identify, we're going to talk about that. But think about when a friend of yours or someone you know is pregnant, or you just hear that they became a parent. What's one of the first things that you think about? What do you want to know?
It's a boy or girl?
Boy or girl? Boy or girl? Is it boy or girl? Why? Why do we need to know that? I want to kind of ask you that. Why? What is that doing? Have you ever been talking with someone or seen someone and you find yourself wondering, is that a man or a woman? Is that a boy or a girl? Is that, and it's kind of preoccupying. You might find yourself wondering without even thinking about that part too much. It's kind of like we need to know. Not everyone, perhaps, but it's a common experience, and I want you to kind of consider why. Why do we need to know that? We're going to talk more about it. There was this very funny, for those of you that are around my age, and know Saturday Night Live, there was a skit, Pat. Does anyone know that skit? Remember Pat? There's one. Well, basically, as I won't go into it, but it was the character, no one could tell what the character identified as. And the whole skit wrapped around trying to find out. So, Pat, what are you doing this weekend? What movies are you seeing? Are you going to see, like, the crash and burn action film? Or are you going to see, the love story, Pat would say something gender neutral. And everyone was so frustrated with Pat because Patrick, Patricia, no clue. So it was very funny, but it really showed the kind of the preoccupation. And let's start with the body. Luis did, a fantastic job elaborating on all sorts of aspects of the body. And typically, gender is very tied to the body, right? And it's been a binary system, especially in Western society, too. Male-female, boy-girl, and, so then that becomes how people see themselves and how they're seen from the outside. Well, actually, even at the body level, there is a spectrum of sex, biological, anatomical sex. And I'm not going to go into that. It's not my area of expertise, but I just want to put it out there that, assigned sex is determined by chromosomes, external genitalia, internal reproductive structures, hormones. There's a vast array of biological and anatomical markers that is labeled female and labeled male. And I'm using the word label because I want to make the point that the word is very connected to something real, the body. So a male and a female is kind of taken for granted that those are things, discrete things. And what we know is that there's actually a spectrum. 2 babies born every day, 1 in 2,000 babies born have bodies that do not fit the gender boxes. They don't fit male, female. And through this vast array of markers that we define biological assigned sex. So, food for thought, food for thought. So let's talk about gender. Gender is not considered assigned sex, meaning gender is not what the doctor says, oh, it's a, or many people learn before giving birth, what the sex is according to what the anatomical features are. Gender is one's innate, deeply felt, private experience of themselves that could be male, could be female, could be a mixture of both, and it could be neither. That might be surprising to some maybe none. Maybe some of you are familiar with that, those gender identifications, but not everyone identifies within the binary, male or female. Some identify as a mixture. Some do not identify. Their experience is, I'm not male or female, it just doesn't fit me. They call themselves different things. We can talk about the language, there's different language. One is gender fluid. It just as an example, not all societies have a binary gender system. There are societies over the course of history that have 3 genders. There is an Indonesian society that has 5. Wow. And one of the genders, it's the Bugis society in Indonesia. If anybody knows Indonesian, I apologize for my pronunciation. But the one gender is called the Bisu, and the Bisu are, the translation is gender transcendent. This is fascinating. They are identified as all aspects of gender combined to form a whole. There was discovered by a historian in 16th century Nigeria, the Yoruba people. Prior to the colonization, the Yoruba people had no concept of gender. No concept of gender. It's hard to imagine that. It's hard to imagine no concept of gender. Their society was organized around seniority. That's how the roles were determined. That's how age, essentially. So a lot of evidence that gender, and even maybe biological sex assignment, is socially, it's constructed, it's labeled, and there's a strong social constructive aspect. Some people, this is in the field, historically there's this gender is essential, meaning we're born male, female, and that's who we are, or it's all a construction. And there's tension in the field. I think more broadly, there's a lot of appreciation that construction is very powerful. I think some would argue that not absolutely everything is constructed, but the two don't need to be oppositional. We live in our bodies, and there's a complex entanglement, with what's outside and what's inside. And they go hand in hand. So gender is also, I think Louise mentioned this, gender is not sexual orientation. It used to be, if you're a man, you love women. If you're a woman, you love men, especially in Western society. That's not cross-cultural, nor is gender cross-cultural. Biology is cross-cultural. Biology is the same across cultures, but these constructs are not. So, of course, that's changed a good bit, and but it's still conflated in people's minds. It's still connected. psychically, and we can talk more about that. So how someone expresses oneself as a human is often gendered. You know, we have our gendered surface. We have how we have physical attributes. Of course, we have how we dress. There are behaviors, there are mannerisms, and it doesn't necessarily, you know, line up with how one identifies, for example. So think about it. Think about all the different possibilities. Someone could say, you know, I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, but I shop in the men's department. That's what I do, because I like it. I like clothes. So, you know, think about all the ways in which our social system is gendered. Departments separate, and how one is internally, privately. You know, one's felt sense of self does not necessarily line up with how we all think gender expression is. And this brings us to the categories of masculine and feminine, which are categories, which are constructs as well. You think about it. Masculine and feminine, these are ideas of what kind of they're connected to the body, the idea of the binary, male-female, but much more elaborated, you know. So that there are, you know, traditionally masculine characteristics, feminine characteristics in behavior, in looks, in attributes, in virtues. This again has evolved incredibly over time, historically. Just a few examples. I think everyone knows this, but everyone knows that there's been an evolution, right? I mean, 100 years ago, women were seen as too feeble of mind to vote. Just can't do it. We couldn't, you know, get the intellect, the judgment. We just couldn't rise to the occasion. You know, now that's preposterous, right? I think now, generally speaking, the idea that women would not be seen as fit to vote but that was part of gender then. So these constructs evolve. In 16th century France, high heels were the epitome of masculinity. Okay, share the pain, was my thought. But, you know, I'm going to read you something. This is from a magazine, an infant clothes magazine. There has been a great diversity of opinion on the subject, but generally accepted rule that pink for the boy and blue for the girl. And the reason is pink is a stronger color, more suitable for the boy, because boys are stronger. I added that part. While blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. That was a quote from 1918 Trade magazine in baby clothes. Like everyone's like, can you imagine? You know, that is inbred in us. You know, I mean, you see it in kids. They're like already 3 years old. No pink. You know, no blue. No, I'm a girl. We try to help our kids, but you know, it's in us. So I want to throw out some names to you to bring up visions of what comes up for you with gender. Diane Keaton. Does everyone know Diane Keaton? You know, Manhattan. What does she look like? Giselle, the Brazilian top model. What's her? How do you pronounce her last name?
Benchen.
There we go. Think Prince. How about Barack and Michelle? I'm asking you to kind of reflect on what comes up for you, the feelings and how we organize meanings along, you know, gender lines. Ellen DeGeneres. Arnold Schwarzenegger. So gender is all around us. Everything is gendered. Things are gendered. Roles are certainly gendered. Objects are gendered. And it's like water to fish. And we're often unaware of its present, ever-present nature. I want to talk a little bit about, there's a good bit of research on gender and how it's influenced, and just talk about a few things. One is that babies are treated quite differently depending on what sex they're assigned and what gender they are. You know, you could imagine girls are kind of treated a little bit more gently. There's more cooing. You know, there's always cooing with a baby, but there's more cooing with girls. And boys are, you know, they're played with more. They're kind of handled more. And this is that kind of happens behaviorally. It's not like it's in people's minds, but this is what happens. So you can imagine, just think about the effect of that on one's body, one's experience in the world, one's socially, relationally. There's an experiment done where there were two control groups, mixed genders, but two separate groups. One group was asked to fill out a piece of paper before they took a math and a language test. The other group, there was no filling out. They filled out like their name. One group was they both filled out papers. One group had gender boxes, typically male, female. The other group did not. The group that had the male, female boxes were basically, anyone familiar with some of the psychological literature called priming. It just doesn't have to be conscious. It makes you aware of something called priming. The group that was primed to their gender within the binary performed consistent with the stereotypes. Women did more poorly on math, better on language, men vice versa. The group that was not primed, there was no connection to gender. So let's think about the implications of that. It is a psychic organizing force, how we think about gender, how we perform and even experience the world. So part of what happens relationally is that it's handed down, and you all probably have experiences of that. Probably everyone has experiences of either being on the other end of, but you're this, and so you're wearing that, or you're doing that, or or thinking that about someone. They act like a man, they act like a woman, but they're this, and where are they coming from gender-wise? So it is, there are gender norms, and one of the things that we want to talk about is that these norms are regulated and enforced by society, basically people and the media, but kind of all of us, and as well as broadly all the ways in which norms are regulated. I mean, sometimes they're illegal, but that's far from what the sea that we all live in terms of the power of the waves. I want to go a step further and say that gender as a norm is often exercised coercively. There's a coercive, anxious regulation of gender, if you think about it. And there can be, of course, from anxiety to hostility. There's a continuum. Typically, it's kind of like, some of you may have regulated yourselves. Well, I want to wear that, but if I do, I'll get more attention, and I don't want attention. I don't want any hostile attention. I don't want any, I just rather would not have attention. I just want to wear this shirt, but I'm not going to wear it. So that's a regulation of oneself, and there's some anxiety. And that norm seems to be connected to this kind of fear, anxiety, sometimes panic, deeply disturbing feelings that go along with either reacting to oneself or others that are outside the norm in some kind of way, more or less. And of course, a lot of meanings are attached to people that act outside the norm, like they're not inside. If you're inside the norm, there is a kind of a boost effect. It's like, well, you're healthy, you're desirable, you're moral, you're valuable. When people start to vary from the norm, the associations along those lines start to diminish. All the way to you're pathological, you're ill, you're not fit for society. We're talking about gender. We're talking about typically the gender surface and sometimes the gender identity. gender starts to become, if you're outside the norm, it starts to become incomprehensible to others. I don't get it. Some of you may be experiencing that kind of, how can you, one, identify not male or female? How does that even, it may be hard to, you know, that's kind of an experience of incomprehensibility. And we're talking about a human being. And imagine the social, relational impact of that. There can be, so if we think about all the ways that norms are, there's a normative, the norm is exercised coercively. There's a coercive regulation of norms societally. So, you know, everything from you can't wear that, you can't be that, you can't think that way, you can't do that. You are, you know, by your desire to express yourself or do that thing or think that way, you are, something's like fundamentally wrong with you, is part of the message, which for many is taken in, and I would say all of us in one way, form, or another, in say working with patients, how one identifies gender-wise affects how we measure ourselves at times. Some people more or less, but everyone and for others to a greater degree, there's an impact. So if there's a few examples I saw recently of very loving parents, and I know them, and I know they're very loving, and how I saw these norms coercively exercised. One was a boy with friends at our house, and he fell and he was crying, and the mother was, you know, after about 30 seconds was like, dude, are you gonna cry in front of your friends? Yeah. Really? And, you know, would that have happened with a girl? Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that was the mother, you know, kind of like she's a little anxious. There's something like you know, her little boy's crying. There's something about that amidst, it was mostly other boys, which is a factor, you know. And another example was, I was at a birthday party and a boy was running and somehow he got caught. He kind of like, there was a piece of material that caught his neck, so he was kind of choked. He was like 7. And you know how when you're choked, you're like, you can't really talk. So the father, he was crying. The father picked him up, loving father, very adorable, nice man, picked him up, shook him, and said, talk to me. Shook him. You know, would that have happened to a girl, you know, a female body? No. So the coercion, the gender coercion, is body. Which communicates message. And of course, there's verbal. That's everywhere, and there's image everywhere in our society. But it's also very physical, and we all have examples of that. You know, there are so many examples. You know, a classic one for girls is that what's the first thing that you think about telling a girl when you see her? So pretty. You know, it's loaded, and that forms, you know, to receive recognition for that. It becomes, we internalize it and it becomes part of our sense of value and our sense of, you know, what's important, and that connects to gender. And so imagine swaying away from that. You know, that's, I'm not going to receive love and attention. I'm not going to be valued. So part of some of the implications of the normative coercion of gender in society, and just think of your lives and, you know, your families, is that people develop shame, people develop a sense of inadequacy, certainly, and all those things, low self-esteem, and it's not particularly conscious. This isn't necessarily conscious, but it certainly has a lot of mental health impact, like depression and anxiety, and the whole spectrum of struggle, you know, of emotional struggle. one of the things, just speaking about masculinity and femininity, those constructs. If we think about, say, masculinity and how activity and aggression is very privileged. You might have examples where there's a lot of pleasure taken in when people refer to a child. Well, that's a boy. We were having this conversation. There's a boy, and there's just something like, yes, in that, and that, there's a girl. She loves her sparkles, And what is that? What's the pleasure and the relief, maybe, in identifying someone that way? This is one of the ways that the policing that takes place in society is internalized, and there's an inner policing. And men and boys, particularly, are very anxiously monitored for passivity and helplessness. Can't be that. Can't be those things. And if we think about the implications of that there's by definition, not being able to have the human experience, there's a warding off of pain and loss, which of course affects one's psychological health, and then affects society, because when you're not able to connect to your own pain and loss, you don't see it in others. You kind of ward it off in others to a great degree. So part of what we're talking about is misrecognizing someone who is human. So there's a constriction of humanity that happens with the coercive regulation of gender, and the kind of unreflective thinking about or experiencing gender norms as truth, as fact. The other thing, so that there's a misrecognition. A colleague of mine refers to it as a trauma of misrecognition. When someone's misrecognized, you think about we all like to be recognized according to how we experience ourselves. And the case is very much true with gender, how one identifies. You want to be identified outside of yourself according to how you identify. And the thing about gender is actually it's an assumption that we always make how people identify. You don't really know internally. You don't ultimately know if someone identifies their gender, male, female, mixture, or neither. So getting back to the effects, the sense of inadequacy, of not being good enough, can be very subtle and not necessarily psychologically in someone's consciousness connected to gender. It's kind of like a felt sense, like I'm not meeting, I'm not falling in line, so I don't belong. And one of the things is there can be feelings of, disappointing others that are very profound. And it essentially constricts one's sense of oneself, because it restricts thoughts, feelings, relationship, and then it restricts capacities in relationship. So meaning the smaller sense of self you have, the more difficult it is to relate lovingly to others. And everyone has their own unique experience of gender. And it's kind of something worthy of talking about it as you reflect on your gender experiences and what you think is okay and not okay. And but everyone's experience is unique. In other words, it's lived. We all do gender actually differently. There are broad similarities, but one example was I was putting a talk together with a colleague of mine, and when she was 7, she loved playing cowboys and cowgirls, and she had a holster with guns and cowboy boots, and she also loved running and jumping and playing and kicking the soccer ball around. And for her, the way she narrated her own experience was, I love boy things. I love cowboy and Indians. I love soccer. I love boy things. But for me, I love running around. I wasn't into cowboys and Indians, but I love, soccer, play sports. And for me, I was a girl playing soccer. I wasn't doing a boy thing. That's just a subtle example of how we live and we experience gender very differently. And so each person has that unique experience. So where am I at time-wise? Oh, okay. I went a little quicker than... Maybe we could... Well, I know there's question and answers at the end. But maybe we can talk, because I put a lot out there. And I haven't really gone into the, vitalizing, let's say, healthy or affirming ways of treating ourselves and others in connection with this topic. But maybe we can talk about that. I know that's going to be a theme. So why don't we open it up for some discussion? Yes.
One, you've given us a reflection of how we look at gender in society and the direction where society is going. What are some practical suggestions for us who have children to give them a more balanced view? Simple things that we can do, knowing we're in a society, knowing we're in South Florida, and how can we make it a little more expansive for our kids?
Yeah, because... Okay, I'll repeat the question. John asked, what are some practical suggestions, in particular with youth, children, in this society? You mentioned South Florida, but broadly speaking, in which we can convey health and understanding about gender and what's happening. And there are so many. And maybe we can generate some here, in our group. But there are some essentials that, things and activities and behaviors are not gender. They're not gendered, So things like clothes. I mean, it's simple, but it's hard. Clothes are things. They're not genders. There isn't a boy and girl in that. It's material. People's gender is personal, meaning it's private, and you don't know how they identify unless you ask, unless they tell you. You really don't know. Of course, generally, broadly, people assume within the binary, So these are the kind of discussions that you can have with youth, and if you using kind of day-to-day, it's everywhere, it's bombarded by gender messages. You can basically challenge the message, typically, and help children and youth think for themselves, which they're very capable of doing, actually. More capable the younger. I'm sure a lot of you have had experiences, with my own kids. And I was kind of talking about the gender spectrum. It's like some identify as boys, some identify as girls, some feel like a mixture, some don't feel like either. And my daughter's like, I'm kind of like a boy. It's just like, like kind of flexible, like there's a lot of malleability there with when there's youth.
Give the example of the Spotify.
Oh, we were downloading Spotify yesterday, and they had, they want to know your gender. Of course they want to market to you, but the boxes were male, female, non-binary. That's at Spotify. So kind of pointing things out like that. But a lot of it, too, is one's inner work. Kind of noticing, kind of catching yourself with the assumptions, and affirming all the ways of expressing gender, and or expressing one's humanity, whether it's coded gender or not, and that there's so many opportunities, and it's helpful to bring it up, because the gender messages at school, brutal, killer. It's like they're there all the time. It's like the language of schools. There are a few schools that have rolled out programs where there are curriculums, and there are curriculums in place that have been developed, that are available to schools if they want to take that on. There are a few that have, actually. So it's often countering, and it's catching, and it's not waiting for kids and youth to ask questions. More like talking with them about that, asking them questions. So certainly being loving and respect, it's a respectful for all, this core message is respect and love for all humanity. But it gets quite tangled because there's a lot of anxiety. Typically parents are afraid their kids are going to be bullied, harassed, judged, rejected, and there's some, that there's some reality there, that there's going to be, there potentially is some pushback, or a lot of pushback. We know that there's a lot of violence in our society. Yeah.
Let me just join you here and actually give a testimony in the area of gender for myself, because when we put this together, our main idea was to bring some material that could be not so theoretical, in that people could really relate, and there's really very few people who actually have the comfort level to talk about it. So I'm going to tell you about my gender experience, right? So how do I identify? I have always identified as a woman, always. But I think she was talking about me when she said that I go to Banana Republic and I walk straight to the men's section. And that's where I shop, okay? Now, my mother, for many, many years, gave me dresses. And let me tell you how I feel when I put a dress on. I like it, right? You've seen me undressed. Some people who sees me undressed today, they say, no, it's not you. Why not? I mean, yeah, well, am I or not? I don't know. So, anyway, not so long ago I was in Brazil and I went out to shop with my mom and I saw a dress that I actually liked. I thought it was like really pretty. And I put it on, I was like, wow, it looks good. And I brought it. I actually bought it and brought it. And I never wear it. Because what happens is, although I put it on and I like it, and I like how I look, when I open my closet and I have to choose the clothes, I like those shirts. That's what I like, right? Now the question is, am I not a woman because of that? Who, by the way, established that button shirts are men's clothing? No. At what point in time was this established? So is this an issue of essence? I mean, why do we have male and female departments anyway? Wouldn't it be nice if it was everything together and you could just walk in and pick up the clothes that you feel good on wearing, right? So what is feminine? So like Sheri was talking about, that has evolved tremendously, and you can have someone like Diane Keaton who wears ties. Not too long ago, maybe a year or two ago, we had a party at the house and I wore a tie. And I'll tell you what, so let's talk about the difficulties and the ways in which we suffer. I would love to wear ties more often, but I don't. I don't. Why? I don't because I am still concerned with how people are perceiving me, and I am, like anyone else, wanting to be accepted in society, right? So people have reactions to that. In my own family, because the day I posted that picture on Facebook, I received some messages back. Why are you wearing a tie, right? Do you really need to do that? Is that a need? I just liked it. I felt like I was charming, I think you like it. I mean, right? And then there's the whole issue with the hair. Short hair, long hair, and people are so bothered by the length of my hair. I can't take it anymore, right? So just to kind of bring some color and some, idea of what one can go through. I'm in a point of my life where I have thankfully come to a place of self-love, self-acceptance. I can talk about those things. I can joke about those things. But there was a point in my life that those comments were very hurtful. Were very hurtful. Because you cannot be who you are. You have to conform in order to be accepted. You have to conform in order to be approved by others. And I'm like 90% of where I want to be. 90%. I think there are a couple of things that I would like to do, but I'm still not there to be able to do. But one day, in this lifetime perhaps. Right? Alright guys. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to, maybe there's
Are we done with 15? Or
Yeah, we can,
okay, go ahead.
we're gonna take a little break,
Okay.
but go
But I
ahead.
thought one more. No, I just want to kind of piggyback on what Suzanna's saying, and I think we, in terms of the level of violence that can occur, you know, there's very subtle, and then there's overt, you know, extreme. And broadly speaking, you know, anyone who, however someone identifies, male, female, or, you know, both or either, there is this regulation, this societal, you know, kind of coercive regulation that is in the family and broadly. And, you know, I think that in some realms, you know, male bodies and people that identify male are regulated very anxiously and very, you know, violently. And that occurs across the world. Women are highly regulated and starts to get into the realm of sexuality as well. But there are many stories. You know, I want to wear, you know, I want to wear pink. I want to wear a scarf. I want to have a purse. You know, but there's that question. I don't want to deal with the social pushback. I don't want to deal with, like, that's not you. I've gotten the same thing too. I used to wear a lot of dresses. I just kind of evolved. Pretty unconsciously, I'm just kind of like,
Or regress.
right?
Who knows?
One or the other, I don't know. I'm not worried about it. But when I've worn dresses, people say, "Oh, you're in a dress." It's like, yeah. In my 20s, like I was always in dresses, but then I just kind of shifted, you know. So.
All right, so we have time for more questions. We're gonna take a break. It was half an hour. Let's make 20 minutes because we're running a little bit high. So you can stand up, have a little cup of coffee. There's cheese bread out there. And then we'll come back for the lecture with Andrei Moreira on Chapter, okay?
That is good. Okay. Negative parts express well
Right. Yeah, I mean, but I think the media is a reflection of us, right? So it's like outside and inside. It's like recycles, it reiterates itself. And there has been one really broad. That's cadeira que está muito aqui de this kind of like outside challenge.
Viu, né?
So one of the things that people do with they pull categories. They categorize it further. It helps relieving the conflict. At that time, it was like quality, but now it's quality first. But now it's like the conversation is what makes a person. That was not part of the conversation. You know what I mean? How one experiences. One's body is not. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Yeah. Right. But I that's. I mean, I don't. I'm certainly have two of those factors. Some people. Yeah. One of the biggest differences is, I get to. Well, but what? Oh, I know. It wasn't like that. I know. Yeah, but it is more responsibilities. I think it's almost like there's this. This is volatility. There's this. Let's go to this, and certainly. If it appeals to a certain psychic, it goes. Right. Yes.
So it's kind of like feedback.
What's trending for you? So, yeah.
Very like interesting thought-provoking.
Yeah, it wasn't too theory.
I like listening to
It's fascinating. We didn't even get to the sexuality part. It's so good. Yeah. Fantastic. I will have some.
No. I know.
Like Keisha.
They have in when we were just in Brazil, and they had like talented kids who multi-grain.
No way.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like.
How can that be? Because it's yoga. Was it good?
I just saw it and
it wasn't worth the taste now. Not when you have the real thing.
Wow, that's interesting, but no,
Trying to make it healthy.
I ate so much. So good.
I know. I could just live off this. I could.
Do you like the
I know. Yeah. No.
But I wait. I'm gonna scoot out and go to the bathroom before we start again. Thanks.
You want some more? Yeah. Oh my god, I wouldn't do that so good. I cut it. I cut some of the things that I said I was going to cut. It's okay.
But it's been around too. I'm just a little bit of the time.
Essa minha irmã respondeu, vem cá, checa aqui pra fazer de novo aí, ó. Pra ver se o que tá fazendo esse barulhinho, que isso engraçado. Como é que a gente vê isso?
Você tá com volume, amiga, ainda?
Amor, não tava desligado. Não, céu. Limpa esse negocinho assim.
Clear everything.
Not experienced speaker thing.
Eu botei muito. Sounds and notifications. Mídia estava um bocadinho, ó.
Mas você não queria pôr muito? Aí eu não pus. Acabou minha vacação, né? Amanhã eu vou voltar pro campo.
Como é que é?
Acabou minha vacação.
Hoje é 24 pessoas lá que nossa, quanta gente. O resto é teus amigos. Gostou muito aqui pra caramba. Tô arrasando essa foto.
Ah, também gostei.
Só vou botar minha depois, senão eles vão falar realmente. Eu vou botar meu profile picture só pra você botar realmente. Agora eu acabei de chamar de você amor. Eu falei, ai, caramba. Tá vendo como é errado essas coisas? Aí o gender aí nesse negócio, nessa história. E o Guilherme falou, mãe, faz meu bolo pro aniversário. Eu falei, tá bom, vou fazer seu bolo. Aí ele falou assim pra mim. Eu falei, que bolo que você quer? Eu quero de vanila, mãe, mas eu não quero de caixinha, eu quero um bolo de gosto de baunilha. Sem gosto nenhum, só baunilha. Recheio, eu quero a mesma coisa que o frosting. Eu falei, que frosting você quer? Ele falou assim, eu quero frosting...
Ficou linda essa foto.
Ficou linda, nós arrasamos essa porra. Aí ele falou assim, eu quero aquele frosting, não frosting de vanila, mas que tem uns... não é assim, sprinkle, não. É chip. With rainbow chips. Rainbow chips. Eu nunca tinha visto isso. Aí a Juliana,
É o colorido.
please. O Guilherme quer coisa com rainbow chips. Não, aí na hora a gente fez fã, não sei não, rainbow. Aí depois eu liguei pra ela e falei assim, mas qual o problema dele querer um bolo com rainbow? Né? Isso já é isso que eles estão falando ali. Só porque ele é menino, só porque ele tem 29 anos, ele tem que gostar de chocolate, que não tem cor nenhuma, entendeu? Bota chocolate. Agora, como ele quer rainbow, então é... Entendeu? Nada a ver. Nada mais certo de chegar e falar.
Gabrielzinho não tem preconceito com essas coisas, nem nada, graças a Deus. Mas, às vezes ele fala assim, por exemplo, igual quando eu falo alguma coisa de hobbies, por exemplo. É ser feliz. É ser estar de bem com você. Isso é ser. Então você, se é isso que você está falando e você é, então você não existe isso. Eu sei que não tem preconceito, mas ele tem coisinhas que pela sociedade te trazer, te faz falar assim.
Então, como a Stephanie cresceu e quando ela fazia pergunta, eu respondia e não aumentava a história, ela dos três, né? A Juliana ainda tem, ela tá vendo? Rainbow, não sei o que. A Stephanie não vê nada dessas coisas. Tudo pra ela é natural. Então, por isso que quando ela está agora fazendo antropologia, ela está amando, porque ela está se encontrando no que ela já acredita, entendeu? Por isso que ela liga pra mim. E hoje, ela falou assim, mãe, eu hoje aprendi sobre gênero. O que é gênero pra mim? Ela me liga pra me dar a informação. Ué, Ana, menina, não tem nada a ver com isso. Vou começar a explicar pra senhora agora. Passou pra mim, entendeu? Quer dizer... Não, eu acho. A maneira que ela vive assim, entendeu? Além de que ela tem que trabalhar muita coisinha assim, muita coisa assim, sentimento, feelings, ela tem que trabalhar muito, entendeu? Mas a vida está trazendo para ela e ela está encarando, ela encara assim, é você? Ok, parabéns para você, entendeu? Ela não vê nada, ela não judge.
Ela ainda está lidando. Por isso que ela ainda
pra ela mesmo.
Não, simplesmente, entendeu?
É tudo isso. É tudo isso. É a proteção ali. Ela tá.
Exato,
Ela bota
é
na
barreira.
frente. Toda vez que alguém chega pra ela e ela se interessa, depois o que aconteceu com o fulano? Ah, meu Deus, mas quem foi? Mas sabe como é que é? É a barreira. É a barreira que ela bota ali, ela não quer conversar, não quer falar. Mas fica comigo, te entendia tão bem. Eu gostava do rapaz sem conhecer. Ele falava umas coisas pra você que eu falava, pô, esse cara tem uma cabeça muito boa, que ele tá botando você pra frente.